Honey, I'd like you to meet Alyssa.
I extended my hand and Alyssa smiled as she shook it.
It's nice to meet you, Candace. I've heard so much about you.
Dad's phone buzzed.
Please excuse me, I have to take this.
Alyssa nodded and Dad left the room. Alyssa suddenly leaned towards me.
If you don't do as I say, I'll make your life a living nightmare.
Hi there, I'm Candace from Ireland. Please like and subscribe. When I was 3, Mom passed away from an illness, and it's just been Dad and I ever since. Dad and I were very close. He always treated me like his little princess, and we'd get manis and petties together, go to the movies. He'd even set up my dolls and stuffed animals, and we'd pretend that we were runaway models. When I was 15, Dad introduced me to his girlfriend Alyssa, and 6 months later, they were married. She did and said all the right things when Dad was around.
Ethan, I think it's time Candace got her own computer. Or, I think Candace and I should have a girls' day out.
She'd always blink flirtatiously at Dad, and he was swooned by her charm. But he had no idea how evil she really was when he wasn't around. One weekend, Dad was out of town for business. I was in my room when Alyssa burst in and threw a waitress's outfit on my bed.
Put this on and meet me downstairs. You'll be the waitress tonight at my party, or I'll tell your father you were out past your curfew.
I groaned as Alyssa walked out. I quickly got dressed and went downstairs. I didn't want to be around Alyssa's friends, so I did everything possible for her to send me back to my room. First, I dropped a tray of salmon platters on a guest. Then I accidentally pulled off the wig of a man who was flirting with Alyssa. And finally, during dinner, I poured wine into Alyssa's lap instead of her wine glass.
Look what you did, you worthless child!
She stood up furiously. Get out of here! I smiled slyly, walked upstairs, and locked myself in my room for the rest of the night. The next day, I came home from school and Dad found all the pictures of Mom, Dad, and I torn to pieces on my bed. Alyssa was standing in my bedroom doorway with an evil snarl on her face.
You don't need those pictures anymore. Your dad is happy with me.
Immediately, I called Dad on the phone and told him what had happened.
Candace, they are just pictures. You should have had them stored on your computer.
Dad, she tore up my pictures. How could you take her side?
She was upset after you embarrassed her in front of her friends. I'm sure she didn't mean it. Candace, I have to go. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. I'll see you tomorrow.
The line went dead. I looked at my phone in disbelief. I don't even know why I bothered to call Dad anyway. He never took my side. 2 years later, I got accepted into the college of my dreams. I was excited because it meant I didn't have to live under the same roof as Alyssa. As soon as Dad got home that afternoon, I rushed down the stairs and shoved the letter into his hands. I got in! I got in! Dad read the letter, and instead of excitement, a wave of regret washed over his face.
Sorry, Candace, but I can't afford the tuition for this college. I gave all the money from your college fund to Alyssa to start her business.
You did what? Grandma left that money for me. How could you?
Look, you can still go to community college.
Alyssa handed me a brochure.
At least you'll still get a college education.
On the first day of college, the unthinkable happened. It was the last class of the day. I sat in my chair, but suddenly the world turned sideways. The chair leg broke and I collapsed on the floor. I kept my eyes closed but prayed that no one had seen me, but I wasn't that lucky.
Hey, are you okay?
My eyes fluttered open and I looked into the eyes of the cutest guy I'd ever seen. As he helped me up, I felt the eyes of the other students boring into my skull. Immediately, the bell rang and I hustled from the classroom.
Hey, wait up! Hey, I'm Darian. Are you sure you're okay?
My ego is a bit bruised, but I'll be okay. I smiled shyly.
I'll see you around.
I nodded and Darian went off to meet his friends. Over the next few days, Darian and I became friends. It was nice to have something to keep my mind off my evil stepmother and her treacherous ways. We went hiking, the zoo, the mall, practically anywhere that didn't have Alyssa there. One evening when Darian dropped me off, Alyssa grilled me.
Who is that boy that keeps dropping you off? Where are you coming from? What were you doing together?
You are not my mother, and I don't have to answer to you. I slammed my bedroom door behind me. One afternoon, after confirming my date with Darian to the movies, I spun around to head to my room when I saw Alyssa standing in the doorway of the kitchen.
And where do you think you're going?
You were listening to my conversation, so why not tell me? I smirked.
I forbid you to go.
Good luck with that. About 30 minutes later, Darian pulled into the driveway. Alyssa was nowhere to be seen, and I thought that was the last I'd see of her that day. But boy, was I wrong. About 15 minutes into the movie, a woman sat down next to Darian. Suddenly, she reached out and grabbed his hand. Darian looked over at the woman.
What are you doing?
He tried to pull his hand away, but the woman locked her fingers into his. I glanced over and realized it was Alyssa. Alyssa, what are you doing? I leaned over Darian and tried to get Alyssa off of him.
Hey!
Can you guys in the front keep it down? We're trying to watch a movie here. I jumped on Alyssa and we began to fight while poor Darian tried to tear us apart. Within a few minutes, 2 ushers threw us out of the cinema and onto the streets. Alyssa cackled when the ushers went inside.
My work here is done.
She jumped into her car and drove off. I was so angry I thought I'd explode. I couldn't believe Alyssa would do something like that. Home was the last place I wanted to be, so Darian and I stayed out until 1 a.m. When I got to the front door and turned my key, nothing happened. I tried the kitchen door and it was the same. That witch changed the locks. I banged on the kitchen door, but Alyssa refused to open the door. I found a big stone in the yard and I smashed the kitchen window. I pushed my hand through the hole, unlocked the window, opened it, and climbed through. Suddenly, Alyssa was in the doorway of the kitchen, screaming to someone on the phone.
Someone just broke into my house. Hurry, please.
Alyssa came charging at me with a bat. Alyssa, stop, it's me. She swung at me and I saw stars as she hit me in the head. You'd think I'd be dazed by the hit, but I was enraged. Like a bull staring at a red cloth, I charged at Alyssa. I landed some punches on her stomach and face, and Alyssa got in a few lucky blows herself. We were pulled apart a few minutes later by 2 police officers.
What's going on here?
She changed the locks on the door, then she assaulted me with a bat. I tried to grab Alyssa again, but the officer held me back. The officer turned to me.
Do you want to make an official report and press charges?
Before I could respond, Alyssa whimpered.
Officer, I woke up to the sound of shattered glass. That's when I grabbed my phone to call the police and a bat to defend myself. I love my stepdaughter. Why would I want to harm her?
After the officers took our statements and left, I went to my room, hopped into bed, and fell fast asleep. I was too tired to even deal with Alyssa right now. The next day, when Dad returned home, he was furious.
Alyssa told you couldn't go out, and in retaliation, you broke the kitchen window? Candace, you can't abide by the rules of this house. Then you will have to leave.
But Dad, she's the one.
I've had enough of your excuses. You're walking on a fine line, Missy.
You always take her side. The next day at college, I met Darian by the benches under the trees. I explained everything that had happened. What am I gonna do?
Find your own place. At least you'll be comfortable there.
Sounds nice, but Dad only gives me money for school. Where am I gonna get money for a place?
I'll help you get a job and I'll help you pay some of the bills.
You don't have to do that.
I know, but I want to do it for the woman I love.
My eyes widened. You love me? Darian leaned in and kissed me. I was thrilled. After a few seconds, we pulled away.
I think we should get to class. We don't want to be late.
Darian winked and my heart felt very warm. As promised, Darian helped me get a part-time job at the post office. I gave Darian all the money I made from work to put into his savings account. I couldn't risk Dad or Alyssa finding it and spending it. It wasn't long after Darian asked me to be his girlfriend, and of course I said yes. A few months later, I finally saved enough money to make a deposit and the first month's rent on an apartment.
Candace, I don't think that you've thought this through,
Dad said as he paced the living room.
Baby, let the child go. She isn't of any use here anyway. But let her only take the things that she purchased since she wants to be a grown-up.
I packed my books, laptop, and the few pieces of clothing that I had bought myself. As I opened the front door to leave, Dad said softly,
"You are welcome to return when you adjust your attitude."
Alyssa stood next to Dad.
It's like the trash is taking itself out,
she whispered to me, unheard by Dad. I shook my head and walked out the door. Living on my own was superb. I didn't have Alyssa watching over me, and Darian came over every day. I didn't have much, but I had everything that I needed. About 2 weeks later, while studying in the kitchen, I heard a key turn in the front door. Immediately, I called Darian and armed myself with a curling iron. While on the phone with Darian, a man and a woman holding a baby stepped into the apartment. When they saw me, they stopped in their tracks. "Why do you have a key to my apartment? Who are you?" I waved the curling iron frantically and dropped the phone in the process.
We just paid the landlord the first month's rent and the deposit, and he handed us the keys.
There must be some mistake. He probably gave you the wrong keys because I already paid for this apartment. I invited the family to sit while I attempted to contact the landlord. but I only got his voicemail. A few minutes later, Darian arrived with the police. We explained the situation and showed the officers a picture of the landlord.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but this man is wanted for numerous types of fraud. Every time we've gotten close, he slips through our fingertips. Sorry to say this, but you'll have to vacate this apartment since it's likely this isn't his property.
Once the officers left, followed by the family, I sank into the sofa and buried my head in my hands. What am I gonna do?
You can come home and stay with me.
Darian squeezed my hand softly. I nodded gratefully. That night, I moved out my things and moved into Darian's apartment. Things soon settled down, but then, like most things in my life, they took a sudden turn. One night, while watching television, Darian burst into the apartment.
Candace, your dad has been admitted to the hospital.
I flew up from the sofa. What happened?
Not sure, but a friend of mine who works at the hospital told me. Grab your jacket, let's go.
At the hospital, Darian and I were directed to Dad's room. I expected to see Alyssa there, but she wasn't. Dad was unconscious when we arrived. The doctors said Dad complained about a stomachache, and when they checked him out, it was too late. He had a massive tumor wrapped around his intestines and other internal organs, and they weren't able to move it. I was devastated. Alyssa never visited Dad at the hospital. Dad never opened his eyes again, but I knew he heard me because tears ran down his cheeks when I told him that I loved him. Dad passed away a few days later. Weeks passed, and finally it was Dad's funeral at the cemetery. Alyssa suddenly turned up and wailed as if she hadn't been absent all throughout this time in the hospital. She stood close to the burial hole while they were piling dirt onto the casket.
Baby, please don't leave me. I wish I could go with you.
I scoffed. Where were you when he was at the hospital? Because you have a crowd, you were pretending that you care about Dad?
I loved your dad, and I did everything possible to make him happy.
Ha! You did everything to make you happy. At least he doesn't have to deal with a crazy piece of trash like you anymore. Alyssa slapped me and I grabbed her hair and slammed her face into the dirt. Alyssa and I began to fight, and Darian and some other members pulled us apart. I hate you, Alyssa, I screamed as Darian dragged me away. A few days later, at the reading of Dad's will, Alyssa inherited everything. I knew I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still hurt. I walked out of the reading of the will, and Darian caught up with me in the parking lot. I'm gonna fight that witch for the will.
Babe, don't. Those are just material things. Don't contest the will. Alyssa hired the best lawyer in town. She will win. She's hurt you enough, and I don't like to see you like this.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Over the next few days, Darian paid for me to stay at a hotel and be pampered, while I gathered my thoughts. Even though Dad and I didn't get along, I sure did miss him. I decided to leave the hotel earlier than expected and decided to grab coffee at the cafe before I headed back to the apartment. As I sat there reading the newspaper, my heart stopped when I heard Darian's voice, followed by Alyssa's.
How much longer do we have to pay this charade?
That was Alyssa. I lifted the newspaper a bit higher to ensure they didn't recognize me.
Not much longer, babe. John will be here in a few minutes to tell us our last job.
What was Darian doing here?
It was our luck that the doctors detected that tumor, and we didn't have to take the other route to get rid of her father.
My heart skipped a beat. Alyssa and Darian had planned to get rid of Dad? A few seconds later, I heard another voice at the table.
Hey guys, I'm sorry I'm late.
I peeked to the side of the newspaper and my jaw dropped. It was the landlord of my first apartment. Darian and Alyssa had been behind this all along. I was furious.
We have one more job to do tomorrow, and we'll be out of here.
I sat there and listened as Alyssa, Darian, and the landlord discussed how they were going to rob a jewelry store and the warehouse they were going to meet at after to get the jewels off their hands. I breathed a sigh of relief when about an hour later, the three of them got up and walked out of the cafe. I left about 15 minutes later and went back to the hotel. The first thing I did was hire a hacker to hack into the banking system. I told him if he did the job successfully, that he'd get 30% of whatever Darian had in his account. After he got his share, he wired a hefty sum of $250,000 to an offshore account, which he created under a false alias for me. The next night, dressed in all black, I watched from afar as Darian and the landlord robbed the jewelry store as planned. As they made their way to the warehouse, I contacted the police and gave them an anonymous tip that not only did I know who the jewelry thieves were, but they were having an auction tonight to get rid of the jewels. I parked about a block away from the warehouse and walked the rest of the way. From the rooftop, about 2 warehouses away, I laid on the roof and watched through my binoculars as police raided the warehouse and dragged John, Darian, Alyssa, and a few others from the warehouse into police jeeps. A smile curved my lips as the police jeeps pulled out of the warehouse parking lot. All unfair games must come to an end. Well played, Candace. Well played.